So, welcome back. We're about to conclude our presentation on surgical nutrition and metabolism. I'm Dr. Sananur Rahman. In this section, we'll talk about stressor dependent adjustments. So, we saw what a stressor does to the body, how it alters the metabolism of the body. But now we'll see what are the modifications we can make according to the stressor so that our body can land back to the healing path and attain nutritional efficiency. So we'll talk about a response of the body to elective or accidental surgery. We'll see the difference between the two and how the body responds to them. Then we'll talk about the metabolic adaptation to sepsis, as to what happens when sepsis sets in and what is the metabolic profile at that point in time. And finally, we'll talk about the metabolic response to chronic conditions, the cancer and acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. So, starting off with elective surgery. So, when there is surgical stress, be it elective or accidental. So, first of all, the major difference between elective and an accidental surgery is in an elective surgery, the body is being prepared for the procedure. The patient builds up on the nutrients. If there's a nutritional deficiency, that is corrected, or the doctor tries to correct it. All the tests and the panels are being done. All the considerations are taken into account. However, in an accidental injury, you don't have that time. You don't have the liberty to do to take into consideration all that is important. You only go for the important tests, the important markers, and you just go on with the surgery. So, whatever the case may be, there's surgical stress to the body, and this surgical stress causes the release of hormonal counter-regulation response. So this hormonal counter-regulation response causes increase in the catecholamines, the glucagon, the cortisol, the growth hormone. So there's increase in the catecholamines. These catecholamines help in these are vasoactive substance, so the vessels are being compressed, the volume of the body is being conserved, the body is entering a fight or flight response. Now, these act on the pancreas and reduce insulin production. The reduction in insulin production, and there is a relative sensitivity to the insulin. This causes hyperglycemia. So, there is glycolysis, and glycolysis causes hyperglycemia. This hyperglycemia, it provides a fuel to the body. And it provides fuel to the brain and the red blood cells. However, it can lead to mitochondrial injury or endothelial dysfunction, immune dysregulation, superoxide generation. So, body is in a lot of stress at this point in time. So, there are a great variety of things that can go wrong at this point. So, the body, though this hyperglycemia is helpful for the brain as well as the red blood cells that require energy, but it can also give rise to a great many problems, as can be seen in the figure. So when the amount of this glucose or the hyperglycemia starts to dwindle, that is the glycogen stores, they start to dwindle, the skeletal muscles, they come into play. And now the skeletal muscles, they're being broken down. Along with it, the breakdown of the skeletal muscles, they produce amino acids. These amino acids are used for protein synthesis. The lactate is taken up by the liver for gluconeogenesis. So gluconeogenesis takes place, glycogenolysis, that is breakdown of the glycogen, takes place, and the glucose input in the steady supply of the glucose to the body is increased. At the same time, the adipose tissues, they are stimulated, and there is increase in the lipolysis. The increase in lipolysis causes free fatty acid production. The free fatty acid production causes the free fatty acid to be oxidized to produce glucose and help in the steady supply of glucose in the body. So this is how the body responds to an elective or a accidental surgery. Whatever the surgery may be, it is a stressor for the body and the response of the body remains the same. However, in elective procedure, the body has a time to prepare itself, while that is not the case in an accidental procedure. So again, a flowchart, a comparative diagram that compares an elective and accidental surgery. So when we see tissue damage, there is minimal and controlled in elective surgery, while in accidental surgery can be substantial. Hypotension is uncommon in elective surgery because you have already prepared for the procedure and you're prepared for the complications. However, in accidental surgery may occur, in fluid resuscitation may often be required. When we compare pain, fear, and anxiety, it is typically attenuated with perioperative analgesics and anxiolytics. However, in accidental surgery, so they're not given and generally present in the first hours after trauma. Now, infectious complications are very rare in elective procedure because the procedure was already decided. You try to be as careful as possible, and there's administration of the antibiotics. However, it is more common due to contamination in accidental surgery, and the overall stress response is controlled in elective procedure. However, it is uncontrolled and proportional to the magnitude of the injury, and malnutrition might be poorly tolerated. So this is the major difference between elective and accidental surgery. Again, you need not to memorize this table, but understand it so that you might have a concept and grasp of the difference between elective and accidental surgery and the type of stressor they provide to the body. Now, talking about sepsis. So sepsis is a condition in which the bacteria has entered the bloodstream and now they are flowing freely throughout the body. So this sepsis is a severe infection which is characterized by fever, hypermetabolism, diminished protein economy, that is negative nitrogen balance, altered glucose dynamics, there's hyperglycemia, there's decreased insulin, there's relative resistance to the insulin. So this is going on. There's accelerated lipolysis and there's ketone body production, and then there is anorexia. So this is a multi-level structure, multi-level disproportion that is going on throughout the body, and the bacteria are contaminating the body and they're causing several symptoms at the same time. So hypermetabolism and increased oxygen consumption is also there. So there's polymicrobial infection and anorexia of the infection. This affects the intestine and the glucose metabolism is impaired. At the same time, there's lysis of the RBCs and heme is released in the body, and as a result of which it is lost. So what is happening? All the mechanisms, all the systems of the body, they are not functioning. And what barely they were functioning, the bare function of them was not strong enough to keep them, to prevent them from the infection that has now penetrated the blood circulation. So there's escalation in the enzymatic reaction rate. So there's a frenzy going on. So the body is trying to compensate for it but cannot compensate for it. So there's escalation of the enzymatic reactions. Now, there's increased proteolysis and nitrogen excretion. We've talked about it before. The body needs energy. From where does it get energy? The lipids and the fats. The lipids and the proteins. Now, there's increased breakdown of the proteins and there's nitrogen excretion. The visceral amino uptake is also increased. So the viscera, they tend to uptake this amino acid. The splanchnic amino acid is amplified over 50%. This is being amplified so that if any amino acids are present in the food or the diet, they might be taken up so that they can help in the production of energy. At the same time, there's increase in the fat catabolism. We've talked about this before, since fat is providing energy. So there's increase in the fat catabolism. There's hypertriglyceridemia. This hypertriglyceridemia contributes to hyperglycemia. It cannot convert fatty acids to ketones, which is a consequence of hyperinsulinemia. So as this process is progressing, there's hyperinsulinemia, and the fatty acids, they cannot be converted into ketones, so the body is stuck there as well. So a jumble of complications is taking place now. The body is stuck and is in a very bad shape. Now the trace elements and electrolytes, they follow the alterations in the nitrogen balance. So the alteration of protein metabolism is very important, because it also the trace elements and the vitamins, they also follow the alterations in the nitrogen balance. So always the nitrogen balance should be maintained between the equilibrium positions of -2 and +2. So moving on, now we have chronic conditions. So sepsis was a stressor that was present for a short period of time. So now we're talking about a stressor that is present for a prolonged period of time. So now a patient who has cancer or a patient with acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, these patients have stresses that are there for longer durations of time, and they have to live with them. So how does the body respond to it? So chronic malnutrition may be a result of anorexia. That is, there's difficulty of eating with chronic cancer and acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. And their treatment side effects as well. Due to treatment side effects, one does not want to or can eat. There is prolonged low-grade inflammatory changes which prevent the absorption of materials from the bowels, and all these factors, they contribute to malnutrition chronically. Now, cancers of the aerodigestive tract, that is of the respiratory tract and the digestive tract, they interfere with the taste, the swallowing and the digestion. So it becomes very difficult to have food for the patient, and the patient tends to delay it as long as he can. So as a result of this, the chronic malnutrition, it develops. Now, the patients are usually supplemented with zinc and B vitamins so that their appetite and their nutritional status might improve. Soft mechanical diets might also help the patient in absorption as well as the swallowing. Now, aggressive management of nausea and vomiting is required, because with nausea and vomiting, whatever nutrients that have gone into the body are released, are actually destroyed, are thrown out of the body. So aggressive management of nausea and vomiting is always required. Now, cancer and AIDS related cachexia. So what is cachexia? Cachexia is seen in the later stages of disseminated disease. Disseminated disease has spread throughout the body. So cachexia is actually wasting that can be seen with chronic conditions. It represents chronic catabolic state due to unrelenting inflammation. So there's unrelenting inflammation. The inflammation has been there for so long that now it has resulted in chronic catabolism, and this is known as cachexia. The pro-inflammatory cytokines are constantly being released, as in the case of acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. These pro-inflammatory cytokines, they result in chronic state of muscle wasting and fat loss. So the equation, which usually energy intake is equal to total energy expenditure, in this the energy intake has been decreased and the total energy expenditure has been increased, because in order to fight the inflammation, in order to maintain the body, in order to fight off the infection, in order to just get on with the bodily processes, the required energy is increased. However, the intake is decreased, so there's weight loss and there's wasting in these patients because the energy intake is low. So it is difficult to, cachexia is a very difficult condition to manage. The reason being it develops due to chronic malnutrition, and chronic malnutrition in these patients is due to a chronic condition that usually cannot be treated. So with these untreated conditions, the patient has to live with it, and there's severe consequences of these conditions, and as a result of which the malnutrition, it persists. So mitigation of chronic low-grade inflammatory response may be useful. So this is one of the things that can be used to treat, but it may or may not help. So aggressive nutritional supplement and appetite stimulants is always required. So you have to give an aggressive nutritional therapy to these patients, because this is the only way for their nutrition to improve and to fight off cachexia, which is very rare. Now moving on, the repurposing of dietary balance of N6 to N3 fatty acids. So you can repurpose, you can change the dietary balance of N6 to N3 fatty acids. Because N3 fatty acids are more helpful. There are 38 fatty acids from diet which eventually become incorporated into the cell's plasma membrane. So 38 of them are incorporated in the cell's plasma membrane. They influence their functions and the characters of the cells in which they are being being incorporated. They act as precursors of eicosanoid synthesis. These eicosanoid synthesis can be targeted and help in this is how you can help in with the change of the dietary balance of N6 to N3. So these N6 fatty acids and linoleic acids, both of them help in the production of arachidonic acid. So what does this arachidonic acid do? It helps in production of pro-inflammatory eicosanoids, prostaglandin 2 and LT4. Now all of these, the N3 fatty acid, the linoleic acid, the eicosapentaenoic acid and docosahexaenoic acid, these yield more anti-inflammatory prostaglandin 3 and leukotriene 5. They interrupt the release of interleukin 6, as a result of which this allows the insulin-like growth factor 1 levels to normalize in cachexic patient, and this helps in recovery of these patients. However, it's a difficult case to manage because the chronic condition that underlie still stay there, and they somehow tend to come back with one way or the other. So this was all about this section. In this section, we saw the response of body to chronic conditions. That is how the body responds to them, and the management of cachexia. The management of cachexia is a very complicated topic and has to be taken up patient per patient, because every patient responds differently and has a different metabolic rate. This is a very important topic in geriatrics and would be taken up separately sometime. I hope you like this lecture. For further such lectures, keep watching sqadia.com.